Dr. Linda Papadopoulos, delighted to have you with me here this morning. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
No worries at all. All right, so listen, let me timestamp it. Kind of, we're in February now, 2021, the third lockdown. My starting place, and this is kind of selfishly for me, kind of I wrote a book about speaking, kind of which got released at the back end of last year. And I think kind of one of the interesting things for me is, how do you think people are communicating kind of now in the virtual world as opposed to how we did it face to face?
So this is interesting, right? Because this is something actually that psychologists who work, and I do a lot of this. I work in terms of how the online world affects our relationships, our mental health. So it's something we've been kind of concerned with. What are the differences? What are the challenges? What are the benefits? And look, we know two things. I think in terms of benefits, and anyone who's a parent out there listening to this will know that it's great that your kids are able to stay in touch with their friends that move, that can play games virtually with each other, that that you can speak to grandma and grandpa. These things are wonderful. On the flip side, however, we still know, and again, when we've kind of looked at research of who lockdowns have affected the most, clearly they've affected everyone, but it seems to be that kind of young adult group, which interestingly, you would have thought does so much online, but actually they were saying they really crave this kind of face-to-face. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. I think number one, we, in some ways, our technological advancement has outpaced our emotional evolutionary advancement, right? It's just much quicker, and it takes time to kind of adapt to that. I think secondly, kind of the nuances of the face-to-face discussion that we have, kind of when we don't plan to talk about things. So if you and I were doing this, which we would have been in your offices, yes. I would have come in, you would have had more time to talk about what's going on with your family or my pet, whatever it happens to be. We might have bumped into somebody in the green room. All of a sudden you kind of have that sort of ripple effect of communication, whereas online it's direct. It's like, Linda, I'm gonna log on 10 o'clock on a Monday, we're gonna do this Zoom chat. Once it's done, it's done. So you kind of miss all that buffering, and I think that's what young people crave, whether it's in a new work environment, whether it's at school, or whether it's even in relationships. I think all of us do, frankly.
Do you think we've adapted to that, or are we still? I know kind of you and I, we both kind of, we came on 2 minutes beforehand, and that's what we did. And like, there was no thing about let's have the casual chat. I was reading something somewhere about, like, in team meetings, I suppose, for teams, like the way kind of the ideal thing for a manager is to make it as unstructured as possible, but obviously you still need to get messages across. Have we adapted at all, or are we still?
I think certainly to some extent, the familiarity of it, makes it easier. So you and I, we try to, we still try and do a little bit of it, but the fact of the matter is, because it's so time sensitive, because we're again, imagine the way we're just kind of looking at each other's faces. In a normal meeting, there'd be someone to our left and to our right. So the nuances of kind of, I'm directing my attention this way, that way, actually change the flow and the ebb of discussion. With this, it's very goal driven. What's the agenda? What are the questions? What are the answers? Are we finished? Are we not? And that's it. And I think within that, yes, we've found it easier, so we're adapting in that sense, but actually there's only so much you can do given the current formats of the online environment.
And do you think, in terms of actually our speaking, kind of and how we're talking to each other, has that adapted? Has that changed? Is it much more? Have we lost the ability to meander off into different subjects because we're kind of all focused on the screen and just getting stuff?
I don't think we've lost necessarily the ability, but it's purposeful, right? So we're speaking with a purpose, and most communication, is not necessarily, even very fruitful communication doesn't start off purposeful sometimes. If, again, if, anyone out there is listening to this, think of how many times, something's come out of a casual conversation, of a friend of a friend's, whether it's personal or professional. It's not always when you go in there to kind of meet someone or do work with someone. It's kind of these adjacent conversations. And I think therein lies the difference.
Taking back something you mentioned earlier, kind of in terms of research, obviously in your field and stuff like that, obviously I read the papers and read about what's going on and read about how we as a nation or as a world are. How advanced do you think the research is, or how much do we actually know? Is it just starting out, or have we got a good picture of how people are coping, how people are doing?
Well, look, when you look at research, there's kind of two ways to do research. One is cross-sectional, so it kind of looks at a snapshot. It's what's happening in the here and now. But then the other side, which would kind of get, I guess, more depth, is longitudinal, which would kind of look at things over time. So cross-sectionally, we do have some good research coming out. And actually, we know that, that there's been some great work done on sort of different age groups and how they've been affected, kids not being in school, vulnerable people versus not. So we've got all that. What we don't have is what's the impact of this on the 5-year-old that missed a year of school in 10 years time, when there's, when they're sitting down to do their GCSEs, or 11 years time, right? What's the impact on the young person at age 20 who failed to launch because they were going to go to university? They had to drop out in their first year because the distance learning was difficult. Their self-esteem plummeted, so they didn't get on the job market. Because we know things, for example, like when young people lose their jobs, it has a huge impact on their identity. It has a huge impact on kind of getting back on the ladder. Likewise, what are the effects on violence in the family where someone has had to stay locked down for a year had they not been? So longitudinally, we don't know yet. I know that there's going to be a lot of great research coming out, but cross-sectionally, we do have a snapshot of what's been going on. Yes.
So you and I spoke, or kind of we had a great showcase right in the first lockdown, right at the beginning, back in April 2020, and very much at the time the conversations were all about the self and how we are coping as individuals in terms of our mental health, working from home, and all the changes that were going on. And of course, that's still absolutely relevant, and we are still talking about that. But I think one of the changes I'm really interested in your opinion on and your thoughts on, is around the workplace and the interaction with us as individuals, and what the employer should be doing more in order to support each individual, both as an individual and as a team. Because I think it's something which is struggling both for us as individuals, but also for employers. Have you got any thoughts or about that area?
Yeah, look, I think when it comes to motivating teams, it's kind of critical to kind of understand, I guess, how motivation works. So you need to think about how you're communicating, what it is that what the goals are. It's like we were saying earlier, right? You kind of give someone a task, but then you don't have those moments where you can shape their behavior, sort of, in the lunchroom, in the hallway, kind of ad hoc as you speak. So you have to have clear ways of how you reward and how you shape behavior. I also think that recognition is huge for motivation. And again, I've been doing a lot of speaking around this area recently, and one of the things that keeps coming out is when I speak to both managers and sort of team members, it's like one of the hardest things is when you don't have that mentor next to you, and you don't have that wow, great work, or it feels like we were saying earlier, very contrived, right? That is very needed. So again, it's getting to think about, as a team leader, how do I implement a recognition program? Whether it's a shout out email at the end of the week, or whether it's a personal call going, hey, you know what? I just wanted to hands up, this was awesome. What you did was great. I think also talking about, and I think this is sort of a big one, again, when you're trying to motivate yourself, either on an individual level or again, as a team, as a group, focusing on action versus outcome, because most of communication online is so purpose driven now. We are talking to finish to finish this presentation, whatever else. If you move that to action rather than outcome, then it means that the person working on it can focus on the tasks at hand rather than being anxious about sort of the big picture at the end. So there's a lot of things that we can do, both as managers and as individuals. But again, I think we were sort of all blindsided by this. So a lot of these mechanisms that, that are working are just coming into play now. I think the final thing I would say, and I know you and I have spoken about this before, but I feel so passionately about it, is boundaries. I think a lot of people's mental health is going down because, work is no longer a thing you do or a place you go. It's a thing you do all the time. So I had someone say to me, he was getting calls at like 1 a.m. from kind of people, across the pond, assuming that he'd answer the phone because, hey, you're at home and you're working at home. Stuff like that's really important to change, and you can change it simply sometimes. If you send an email late, write a message saying, hey, I don't expect you to answer this till tomorrow. This time suits me. It doesn't have to suit you. Because again, it's these little things that really kind of get into people's sort of sense of well-being.
And do you think the employer needs to get better, almost kind of giving permission to you to turn off your phone, turn off your emails, or is it on the individual to do it?
I think absolutely. I think there needs to be a clear message of like, guys, this is the expectation. This is the work that gets done. Let's kind of sit down, right? If you want to take, it helps you to kind of work with your kids the first part of the day and then work till 8 or 9 o'clock. That's noted. that's, so that we can communicate until then. There's got to be that flexibility, right? But at some point you turn on and at some point you turn off. That has to be done.
So let me ask one last question, because I'm conscious kind of, I love talking to you, I'm conscious about the time. And it's something that really, really interests me throughout the whole thing, in terms of kind of when the pandemic hit, obviously mental health came to the forefront because we were all super conscious about it. And actually now kind of we are much more aware as human beings about this subject, and we are learning the whole time. We're almost embracing how we individually feel. Do you feel that actually the pandemic and the impact of it has fast-tracked what the human race were going to be having to go through anyway? Or has it been actually a sea change in how we operate and how we think?
I think certainly a lot of the mechanisms that we're seeing kind of being put forward would have been put forward in some way anyway. So I think a lot of education would have moved online. I think a lot of work inevitably would have moved online. But I think it just happened exponentially, and it was forced upon us. So again, imagine, kind of saying education moving online, how much research would have been done into it, right? How many sort of safeguarding procedures, all the things that you'd have to think about. None of that happened. Likewise with organizations, right? This should have been a slow trickle. Imagine sort of graduate trainees, imagine sort of, managers having to manage teams remotely. There would have been seminars on this, there would have been experts coming in to explain. There might have even been professional exams before all this was done. Yet no, it was just dropped in our lap. So yeah, I think a lot of these changes were on the horizon, but on the horizon, perhaps 5 years, a decade away, certainly not overnight like they happened.
Dr. Linda, thank you so much indeed for your time. I really appreciate it. And as always, it's been fantastic speaking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.